phone off this call last night and tried to tell my husband what you had said, Adrian. It wasn't coming back. So I'm so thankful to have this call to hear it again.
Yeah. I was so nervous last night, but you guys were good to me. So I feel good.
Okay. One of my biggest issues was how much you downplayed it. You came in as if like, I'm really nervous. I don't really know what to say. And then just like, have you guys seen the Avengers, what's it called? Infinity War?
Yeah.
Remember when Thor comes back? He comes out of the beam of light and then he jumps up in the sky and just drops the hammer with all.
He's got his eyes going.
Yeah, that's what I was like. Whoa, that's what it felt like. So
that was me.
Yeah.
No, I really was nervous. And then as Kevin was going through the comments, I was like, oh gosh, my comments coming up. My heart was beating so hard. I was so scared. But then after you guys were like, oh, that was good feedback. I'm like, okay, so I'm not crazy. This makes sense.
Yeah, I haven't slept. I'm
trying to bring up your attachment here. There we go.
Yeah, I had a hard time sleeping last night because it was so fun. I was up late and then I had a really rough day at work.
Oh, you did? What kind of rough day did you have?
What'd you say?
What kind of rough day did you have?
Oh, I had a rough day because I barely slept last night.
Oh,
so I was
because
struggling.
of that.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah.
I was just so exhilarated. I was like, oh my gosh, that was so fun.
Yeah.
You have to switch small groups, Adrian.
Yeah. And when I tell you guys, I've been processing it for weeks. And then this week I was watching the video you put out of you and Nick on Monday. And there was something you guys said, and I don't know, I can't remember what it is now, but something like I've been processing all the concepts and how they tie in together, but something that you guys said in that video, it made the phrase methodological possession like just come to my mind. And when that phrase came to my mind, I felt like it encapsulated everything I was thinking. And I was like, all right, this is it. Yes. This is the week I have to show up.
One thing I remember them using the phrase eisegeting reality.
Wow.
And that really stuck out of that video. Nick said that.
Reading things into reality.
You know, I also remember, I don't know if Kevin said it or what, but I vaguely remember like when we were discussing, we were so focused. See, I think this is part of what happened last night is we've been so focused on the dynamics and inner workings of the propositional level. And I remember either myself or Kevin saying something like, okay, so when the propositional level has fracturing or things that aren't corresponding or it's not right, it can it degenerates into ideological possession. That's like the threat vector is ideological possession. So that's what made me like my mind when you were like, okay, methodological possession. It's like, okay, now how does this go down the stack? And where does it go?
So I thought about that too. And something that occurred to me and that I'll bounce off you guys was it's to me, if you think about what it takes to come out of the possession, the ideological possession seems like a few insights can really open you up maybe in a few minutes to realize, oh my, I need to look in a new direction with this. I mean, you can have an awakening experience. It doesn't mean you got everything sorted out, but at least you can get reoriented rather quickly with ideological possession if certain conditions are right. With methodological possession, it seems that there are much deeper ways to get stuck, and the coming out is much harder to undo. Like for instance, say you've learned to you're a pitcher, right? And you're pitching a baseball and you've been throwing a baseball wrong for 7 years. And then suddenly you go to a different coach and the coach's like, you've been doing it wrong. You undo it this way. That happened to me in basketball. I had been shooting the wrong way. I got to a different coach and he corrected it. It took me a while to relearn what that was. So I guess what is occurring to me, and I haven't really worked this out yet, but that levels of possession at each level of knowing would be exponentially more difficult to escape from.
The further down they go.
Yes, the further
I
down they
see what you're
go.
saying.
Yeah.
So like say at the propositional level, you have one or two ideas that can really jog your memory, and it's just a few propositions can really set you straight. At the procedural level, maybe there's 3 things and there's more time. And then at the perspectival level, maybe there's 9 things. And then at the, and then there's 27 things at the something like that. Something where there's kind of like it's exponentially greater, because propositional knowing is such data compression. It would also make sense that the more you go into the other kinds of knowing, the less compressed it would be, and the more correction that would need to be done. I mean, imagine having to correct every component on a 747 airplane, as opposed to just re-steer it in a new direction. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm processing that.
Well, just imagine the deep radical change of someone who goes from being out of Christ and then participating in Christ. It's like, that's like the craziest thing that ever happens to anybody,
right? So it's a different, your participatory knowing, it's cultural.
Yeah.
It's that it's like an operating system. It's that deep.
I was gonna say, I think that if you get possessed on the level of participatory knowing, at that point you are probably living in a delusion.
Yes.
Like you're living in a different version. You're not in tune with reality if you're possessed on that level.
Okay, so I've been thinking about this all day. I think. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
No, go ahead. We haven't even introduced the call yet.
I know.
But we are recording though.
Good.
I'm looking at it. It's recording. What were you going to say, Nick? So, Nick, I want to hear what you want to say. And then what I'd like to do is kind of formally introduce what we're trying to do here. And then I would like to, if Adrian doesn't mind, re-hit her comments. And then Ruth has some comments in the side here, and we'll try to rehash some of the stuff we did last night too. All right, go ahead, Nick.
I'm not going to forget because I've been thinking about it all day, but I think that the participatory space, knowledge space, when it's at its logical end, when it's fractured the most, I think it results in nihilism. That's what I think. And I have some thoughts about it.
Yeah, some of y'all don't know this, but after last night's call, me and Nick texted back and forth. My wife had to tell me to put my phone down.
Me too. Yeah, I got yelled at.
Ideologue, zombie, narcissist, and nihilist. What occurs to me though is, think about, have y'all ever seen the M. Night Shyamalan movie where they're all in you think it's a movie from the late 1700s? What's that called? What's that movie called?
Is that it's The Village People?
The Village.
Oh, The Village.
M. Night Shyamalan. Shyamalan. No, I just want to. Well, The Village. Yeah, the reason this is important is because in the movie, the people are brought up. They're so against. Well, just spoiler alert. You think you're watching like Little House on the Prairie type movie, that kind of time frame, that kind of era. There's no cars, it's all horse and buggies, that kind of thing. Then later on, you find out that, spoiler alert, that they're actually in modern day. I mean, one of the girls winds up getting out, and then like a Jeep drives by kind of thing, and there's a paved road and all this. And you had this whole time, you had no idea that it was in modern day. So the people were programmed to operate different. And you see these movies all the time. They're programmed to operate completely differently. And you see movies sometimes where you have like an alien come from outer space, or somebody come from the 1950s to the modern day, and they're like, oh, what's a computer? What's a credit card? They're just completely not attuned at all with what's going on, you know? And that there's like a participatory, I think the nihilist thing, I think Vervaeke might call that domicide. Maybe.
Okay.
Anyway, so what I'd like to do tonight is as long as anybody's willing to go, I don't want to keep anybody too long necessarily, but for everybody watching, we did not record last night. So we tried to get as many people back together as we could who were actually here. And I apologize, Joe. I don't have your email. I don't know what name is associated with his email address. So that's the only person I couldn't send an email to that was here and talking. But what I'd like to do is we had some really good comments, and I think one of the most mind-blowing things I've heard probably in a year was what Adrian was saying. And if you don't mind, I would ask you to kind of rehash what you were saying last night. Now, it's not just for this group, because I know we've heard some of it, but for the record and for other people watching, so that they can tie together what you tied together.
All right, sounds great. So last night I came on and I was talking to the group about Kevin's analysis of the movie World War Z, and how in that video he was talking about Kairos versus Kronos time, and essentially saying that things that would not normally be, I'm like reading from my notes all over again like last night.
That's perfect. Recreate it.
Yeah. Yeah. So in that video, he was basically saying that things that would not normally be acceptable become the best thing to do in certain situations. So as I was thinking about that concept of Kairos and Kronos time, and how he compares it to the 10 Commandments being juxtaposed to Ecclesiastes 3, it led me to this concept of methodological possession. So Kevin talks about ideological possession, which happens on the propositional level of knowing. And I realized that methodological possession happens at the procedural level of knowing. So an example of that, to circle back to the World War Z movie, is there's a scene where a woman gets infected by a zombie and the guy cuts her arm off. Now, under normal circumstances, cutting someone's arm off wouldn't be the right thing to do. Like if you want to obey the 10 Commandments, you wouldn't cut your neighbor's arm off. But because of the circumstances that they were in, cutting the girl's arm off was the right thing to do. That was the loving thing to do to your neighbor. So it just kind of got me thinking about how if you're methodologically possessed and you're in a situation like that, you wouldn't really be able to discern that cutting the person's arm off is the right thing to do. And there are examples of this in scripture. So one example I pointed to was Rahab and the spies. When she hid the spies, she lied. So that's another situation where if you're methodologically possessed and you're focused on what the prescribed rules are that you're supposed to be following, lying isn't something that you should do. But we see obviously in that situation with Rahab, where she lied, and that was considered the right thing to do because ultimately she was more concerned about demonstrating her fear and honoring the God of Israel when she did that. And then another example was when Jesus healed on the Sabbath in Matthew 12. And this kind of ties into Kevin's concept of the pointer and the thing that's being pointed to. So I think that the law is the pointer, and the thing that's being pointed to is God, of course. And then, Jesus gives us the two greatest commandments: to love the Lord your God with all your heart, mind, and strength, and love your neighbor as yourself. And so in that scene where you see that Jesus healing on the Sabbath, the Pharisees, they're so methodologically possessed by the pointer, which is the law of not working on the Sabbath, that they couldn't comprehend the fact that when Jesus was working on the Sabbath by healing the man, that he was operating according to the thing that's being pointed to. So I was basically saying that if you're a methodologically possessed Christian, you don't really have the ability to discern between Kairos time and Kronos time.
Right.
And you're not able to realize, like, ultimately we want to operate in service to the thing that's being pointed to. And sometimes in doing that, we're going to do the opposite of what the pointer says that we're supposed to do. So I was just kind of talking about how you want to think about what is the optimal way to achieve the goal, which is honoring God and loving your neighbor as yourself. And so we see in those situations with the scene in World War Z and Rahab and Jesus healing on the Sabbath, that they're doing the opposite of the pointer, and which is the law and what the law tells you to do. But they ultimately operated in service to the thing that's being pointed to, which is God. And then I gave an example of, I had a friend come to my house recently, and she was helping me hang curtains. And I was saying that she has more, when it comes to handiwork, she has more attunement in that arena than I do. And so she knows what the steps are, what the procedures are for hanging curtains. And we were trying her process and it wasn't working. And we kept trying and it wasn't working. And finally I suggested something and she said, no, we can't do it that way. That doesn't work. And she didn't really have a reason why. And so we went back and forth for a while. And then eventually we tried it my way and it worked. And so that was a situation where she was so captured by her process, so methodologically possessed by her process, that she was sacrificing the ultimate end goal, which is that we want to hang the curtains up. So I'm the kind of person who I just want to get to the end goal. I don't care if we do it your way. I don't care if we do it my way. I don't care if we, whatever way is the best way to get to the end goal. I want to do things that way. So I'm really open to trying new things and trying different methods and different processes. And I feel like a lot of times people get possessed by their methodology and their procedures of what to do. And they don't realize that every once in a while you have to reassess and reevaluate and say, hey, is this process still valid? Is this process still relevant? Is it working? Is it the most optimal way to get us to the end goal? But if you're, methodologically possessed, you can't really think in that way. You're just kind of held captive. And I think another thing that I mentioned was that the concept of methodological possession kind of ties into the appeal to tradition, logical fallacy, which for anyone who doesn't know is basically the idea that this is the way we've always done things. So this is the way we're going to continue to do things. And I related it to business processes because Kevin often remarks about how people still send faxes. And I think that's one of those things where people just do it because that's what they've always done and not for any other reason. And I work in a very process-oriented role, and I see how people get very stuck in doing things the way that they've always done it and not taking time to reassess and say, hey, is this the best way to get to the goal? Or do we need to throw this process out and develop a new process from scratch? Do we need to reorder the steps? Do we need to take out steps, add in steps? And I think you have to be thinking, you have to be very malleable in your thinking. And I think that's just something you can't do when you're methodologically possessed. So to end it, I had a comment and a question. So my comment was more of an observation, I should say, is that I noticed that the world is very methodologically open-minded in terms of how to get to God. You hear people say there are many ways to God, there are many paths to God, but then they're very methodologically closed-minded when it comes to things that are far less consequential. So my friend, for example, in her mind, there was only one way to hang the curtains. Or you'll hear someone say, well, there's only one way to cook a good steak. So that's just something that I observed. And then my question was that if ideological possession takes place at the propositional level and methodological possession takes place at the procedural level? Is there a form of possession that takes place at the perspectival and participatory level? And how would we define those forms of possession?
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. It's great again. It's like, you ever had leftovers that are better the second time? I think what you said about people being so open-minded about God, but so close-minded about things that seem more trivial, it's amazing that you would pick up on that and that you would see that. And we look at I guess the process of things, order and chaos. There has to be like a balance between, if you have too much order, that becomes your new prison, then it becomes the new chaos that you have to conquer. You know, I mean, the most order you could possibly have is something like a prison or a concentration camp. You don't want that much order, you know? And so when you got a good process in place, but then when it comes time that is no longer the optimal way to do things, it's time to update things. And so it's difficult to be proactive about that. Now, I'll say this too, in this group right here, and I don't mean just the physical people here, but basically kind of this channel, you know, and the people who come on here. By the way, Roberta wanted to be here, but she couldn't. She just emailed me, said she couldn't be here, so she's missing out, unfortunately. Also, James, remember James, that his mother-in-law had a heart issue and they're taking her to the hospital, so he couldn't be here because of that. So our prayers go out to James' mother-in-law. But I guess the point that I'm making is this: if you take the top 5 personality traits in psychology, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, typically your fundamentalist style Christian are very conscientious, high in conscientiousness and low in openness, which makes them tend to be more conservative. So here you have people that I think are interested in scripture, but are also open. I mean, so I think we're like basically conservative. I don't see anybody with like tattoos all over their face and stuff, you know? So we would tend to conserve methodologies, but also we're open enough to try to pry into reality to see new ways to do things. And I think it's a very unique blend that we have here in this group, which is a pleasure to be a part of. It's pretty amazing. And then me and Nick talked about your question there. Are there levels of possession at the deeper levels? And Nick texted me ideologue at the propositional level is zombie at the methodological level. And then we were just kind of like goofing around here. But and then at the procedural level, I guess zombie would be, and then narcissist. And the reason, like, I threw the term narcissist out there because there's a certain point in time when a child, and I'm trying to find an object that I can use that's right in front of me. There's a certain point in time that a child gets a perspectival knowing. And say you take like a ball, here's some AirPods, and on this side there's a silver part, and on this side there's not a silver part. And if you take a child at a younger age and you show him the silver part, he thinks that I'm also seeing the silver part. So whatever he, like, usually they do like a green ball and a green on one side, blue on one side. And then if he sees the blue side, he thinks you're seeing the blue side. And that's basically narcissism, where they can only imagine their own perspective, and the high in narcissism, low in empathy. And then as they get older, they get lower in narcissism and higher in empathy, to where you can see somebody else's perspective. So people who wind up as narcissistic adults kind of latched onto that as a kid, from what I understand, just as a layman reading through some psychological stuff, and probably others would know more than I would. But anyway, so the concept of narcissism occurred to me for perspectival possession. And then Nick was talking about nihilism, and maybe like a domicide thing too, but nihilism would probably be the state that the person is in, for sure. Anyway, I'm going to let some other people say some things about this. Anybody? Josh.
Reminds me of a FSI meeting we had. We were talking about pretty much propositional knowing, and we were talking about the numinous and why did the Pharisees not recognize that Jesus was their savior. And we talked about ideological possession, and I think we mentioned the word legalism too. And I think that's kind of the same thing that we're hitting on with the methodological possession, the procedural level, where you're so stuck in what you think. And like you said, being under the law is the pointer, but when there's a circumstance that's a Kairos, I mean, you're not going to see it if you're possessed by that procedural.
That's right. You won't recognize it. So that's an interesting thing too. So perspectival awareness, you said you won't see it. So if you think of the time of Kronos, like there's a steel ball going through a groove that's etched heavily in the wood, and it's very determined where it's going to go, but it's plodding along, but it's very predictable. In the time of Kairos, on the other hand, is like that groove gets more and more and more shallow to pretty soon that steel ball is just sitting on an open space and it can go anywhere now. So there's a much higher propensity to make decisions that can drastically affect things. Like when you're in that groove, you can only go forward and backwards. In the time of Kairos, is you can make a lot of other decisions. A lot of things can go wrong. Like in the time of COVID, our government and the businesses, we can do a lot of wrong things right now because it's a time of like uncertainty, that sort of thing. But the person with low perspectival awareness would not be able to see it. They wouldn't be able to notice a change in the fitness landscape that, oh, I should probably modify how I'm behaving in this fitness landscape, or I might go extinct, or my processes might no longer be valid in this environment. So if I keep doing those processes, I'm no longer viable or functional or useful. Anyway, that's what you just said made me think of. You don't see it. And I can think of certain people in my life that it seemed to me to not see the change in the fitness landscape that would require an updating of methodologies.
Sometimes I try to think about the Kronos and Kairos, and I would really love to do more scripture analysis, like Adrian had the example of Rahab, and just kind of get those examples out there so we can have those as conceptualizing the difference in that, when is it the right thing to do.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, so if I think of all the transitions when people were doing different things, probably the book of Judges, when they're go between being captives and then going back to the land, each one of those. I mean, think of all the Kairos stuff Samson did. He's breaking all kinds of rules, which maybe that wasn't so good, but at the same time, it wound up, I don't know. Maybe that wasn't a good example. Nick.
If we're open to it, can we try and make a distinction, just for the sake of specificity, between methodological possession and procedural possession? Because a method is not exactly the same thing as a procedure, and in whatever that difference is, I kind of want to.
Well, would they both
explore.
be in procedural knowing though?
That's
because maybe there's a meta term that would capture both.
Okay.
What's your difference? I'm not saying there isn't one, but I'm just ignorant. So
me too.
Yeah, what are you seeing as the difference between method and procedure?
I just intuitively, without looking up the definitions, I think a method would be more along the lines of a tactic, like a planned strategy, versus a technique, like the actual mechanical movement of the thing, like actually performing whatever the methodology is. So the method is like the plan. The procedure would be the execution of the plan. I'm just exploring.
So like the way the word doctrine is used, maybe for like the Truman Doctrine and the Bush Doctrine, And when you think of, it's a policy of action, it's a
Yeah.
methodology
Right.
of actions that are triggered by certain events, and then the procedure would be how to go about executing those actions.
Yeah.
Maybe.
I separate those two for some reason. I put the method, the way that you're describing it, Nick, that seems propositional to me.
Okay.
Oh, wow. Yeah. If you think about it a certain way.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm just trying to think about it.
I'm thinking of I'm going to the thesaurus and I'm looking at procedure.
Adrian, do you have any thoughts on that?
I'm a bit of a slow processor. So also, if you guys see me making faces, I'm just processing. So never take it personally. It takes me a while to go over things in my head, but I'm processing that. I'm thinking about it. But I do think if we get have Kevin give us the thesaurus definition, that might help.
She might have just given us insight. She said she was processing it. She wasn't methoding it. She was processing it, procedurally moving through something.
Digesting it.
In the scientific process, what's the difference between method and procedure?
So in the thesaurus, the method is a high-ranking synonym for procedure. If I go to definition,
Okay.
procedure is an act or manner of proceeding in any action or process, conduct a particular course or mode of action, any given mode of conduct, legal, parliamentary, or other business, especially litigation, judicial proceedings. And then it talks about computers and some other nonsense. And then for method, oh, not that one. You know how when you click on a web page and then it pops up something different? Like, because it's got to load the ads, and then by the time you click on it, the page is moved. All right, so for method, process is high on the synonym list because they color them red, orange, and yellow. And then the definition for method is a procedure, technique, or a way of doing something.
Okay.
Especially, so I think what you're saying is good point, but we may need to dial down, like try to turn up the resolution on the words we're using for it. And I think that's we've kind of gone into a space where I'm frankly at the limit of my intelligence, I think.
I was thinking that last night. I felt so stupid.
Like I can, if somebody tells me how something is, I think I can get it. But when we're developing it, like novel thoughts, it's like, it sounds right. Like, yes, but then I don't know if I have anything to contribute.
You guys ever heard of the YouTube channel Sky Scholar?
No.
So it's an astronomy major, and you know, I love to try to nerd out, but I don't understand half of what he's talking about. Astrophysics.
Yeah. So yeah, I think you listen to that kind of stuff every once in a while, and you pick up like 5% of it, and then you keep listening, and next time you're picking up 10% of it. And you kind of aggregate cumulatively what you can pick up from that kind of material.
Some of those channels I like to call fairy tales for nerds.
Oh, no offense taken.
So I guess for the sake of just closing the door on that, it seems like what I got from you guys from that was that the difference between the two is so small that they both can kind of resemble each other. So when we go forward in speaking about this awesome idea, the interchange doesn't have to be distinguished, and therefore there won't be a loss of resolution. So that makes me happy. So
But you could be onto something. Well, I could just imagine the different levels at which this would play out. Like in an organization, you have, procedures and methodologies at different levels, and you also have policies for what's required, and then policies for how something has to be done. And then in the military, we had something called SOPs, which is standard operating procedure, which is it gets updated slowly. You have a standard operating procedure, and I'll think of it this way. Whatever your phone is or your computer, y'all ever notice that whenever you go to look up, like, how do I do XYZ? Say you want to download a song, or they updated it and you don't know how to do something anymore because they changed the interface. And then you go Google, how do I do this? And then you get a response from the previous version of it. Oh, this is how you do that. Like, I already knew how to do that. I want to know how to do it on the latest release that just came out that I can't operate anymore. And that's the kind of thing that's going on. You want to do something in the military, you go look up the SOP, and it's got something from 5-10 years ago that it's the unit's job to keep that stuff up to date, but do we? And when it tells you to fax the stuff, I'm telling you, it's time to update it. Oh, wow. Yeah, I'm at this place where I just want to sit and think about this. Like, just sit and do nothing and think about it. And I could be completely happy probably for about 18 hours.
Yeah, I really want us to think about and try to define what the possession would be on the perspectival and the participatory level of knowing. I really want us to draw that conclusion.
And at the same time, there's an application to it too. Like, what are we doing procedurally wrong? How are we procedurally, perspectively possessed that's causing the church to be irrelevant?
Yeah.
And what could we do to not become possessed so that we could be more relevant?
Yeah.
I almost feel like we could use like the Lazarus meme from the Calvinists, because that's like that's pretty much what we're talking about.
Something that has died and needs to be called forth.
There's no perspectival knowing, like, at all. You're totally conflating things that aren't even close to being relatable.
So what do you do when you have a statement of faith at your church? Everybody outsources their perspective. Like, here, there's 6 people in this room here, in this virtual room. We have 6 perspectives. And one of the things that is valuable to this group is that you hear all 6 perspectives. If you go to a place where you have a statement of faith and everybody's supposed to toe the line to the statement of faith, you just lost 6 perspectives in favor of one. You just diminished your perspectival knowing. And so you could update your methodology to regain access to perspectival knowing. So it's almost like they're nested, like Russian nesting dolls. The different levels of knowing, they're encased within the other one. And you have to use one of them adjacent to access the other one. Wow. Were you going to say something else, Adrian, a second ago?
I was, but I forgot. that happens. Yeah.
So I want to look at these comments that Ruth put in the side, but I want to say this too. What happened here is kind of significant in the sense of like, you told us, Adrian, you took something that we were tracking, and then you built on it. And then once you built on it, we can come back together as a group, and then we can build on that. So we have this new thing. There's a new capacity. And I think it's a new capacity that is, as far as I'm concerned, is transformative. Is like, personally in my own life, it can help me have more insight into my marriage, in my own job, how I communally relate in the church, how I relate to God, what I get out of meditation, just anything like that can relate to any of those things. I have this sense that if you get people together, and I hate to use this word because somebody's going to accuse me of something wrong with it, but something that we can't predict will emerge, right? So sometimes I ask, like, what are we doing with FSI? Because like I really enjoy it, I really hear these insights, but like, are we going to like build a rocket ship? Like, if we culminate all the ideas and then something happens, what does that look like? And I don't know what that looks like, but I do think that there's going to be something practically useful and beneficial that emerges from what we're doing here. And I felt like I just felt it between last night and tonight. And I've, not that I haven't felt it before, but it's like strong. I like a point of Kairos, if you will. Josh.
So I was kind of thinking about that too, and the analogy that came in my mind, or the metaphor, is kind of like a highway and how many lanes are on the highway. So like, let's say we had a 1-lane highway. Now we've got two lanes. We've expanded. We were on a specific track, and now and for me, that just, it's amazing to see that could happen like that. And my mind's open to a lot of different ideas for that.
Yeah. Yes, Nick.
To build off what Josh said, the analogy that came into my mind last night, and I think one of the reasons why I just felt like I couldn't sleep was I thought to myself, is this the thing that Paul was watching in all the churches when he said, "My little children, for I travail in birth till Christ be formed in you." And the emergence was the birthing of a particular part of the body of Christ, but the travail was the fact that I couldn't sleep last night, and the like the pains of birthing. Yet there's such joy, and I was in celebration mode last night at the same time. And it's like, so is the body of Christ that we're actually, I don't want to be so bold, but it's like, am I actually watching the body of Christ in some form, like birth itself in some way? Because we're so used to having it in our head. Well, the birth of the church, Acts 2. And it's like, yeah, but Paul was saying that till Christ be formed in you. And so last night, I'm still there. I'm still right there.
Yeah, I think something that, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say that's Galatians 4:19, just in case anybody want to go ahead, Adrian.
Yeah, I think something that I have been thinking after last night and just watching the full Stature Initiative over time is that there's something that's happening. I feel like, so like, for example, when you talked about the concept of ideological possession, and then from there, I was able to connect some dots and then create the concept of methodological possession. Yes. I think that we're creating language that we can use as a tool to help us identify things that we're witnessing and that we're experiencing. And I feel like you're a lot more able to deal with something when you're able to identify what it is.
Yeah. When you put a label on it, it helps.
Right. Yeah. So another thing that I'm thinking is all of these tools and all the information is good, but I am wondering, like, what are we actually practically going to do with it? And how is it going to transform us and conform us to the image of Christ? That's what I'm curious to see play out.
Yeah, I think that's something that's going to emerge for sure. Yeah. I have some ideas in my head. Like I think what you were talking about a second ago, Vervaeke would call cultural cognitive grammar, where previously you just go to church and there's all these different words that are like churchy words, but then in order to kind of break loose of methodological possession, if you will, or ideological possession, there needs to be a new set of things to say it, a new set of ways to say it, that break free of the previous ways of thinking. And then also there's something that is useful where you can collect when you have a collection of either propositions or thoughts or methodologies, and you can put a label on it. That's helpful, like what you were just saying. And I don't know why this comes to mind, but in the DSM, that's the Diagnostic Statistical Manual of mental illness. Sometimes it becomes difficult to treat something if you don't know what it is, and so they'll spend a lot of research time collecting a bunch of associated symptoms, and then all the associated symptoms, they put a label on it, and then once you put a label on it, then it's a lot easier to deal with. Okay.
Yeah, that makes me think of the situation with my friend in the curtains. Like, in the moment that was happening, I didn't have the language to describe what I was experiencing. But then when the whole concept of methodological possession came to mind, and I was able to, in hindsight, realize that was what was happening, maybe if I had that language at that time, I could have handled that situation differently. Instead of, getting frustrated with my friend and us kind of bickering back and forth, if I had seen what was playing out and I was able to identify, okay, she's methodologically possessed right now, that could have given me a path for discerning how can I approach this situation to pull
once
her
you diagnose,
out
now you can prescribe.
Right. Instead of me, getting tangled up with her and getting frustrated, I could have approached the situation differently to pull her out of that possession and do it in a loving way, in a kinder way, instead of us just bickering with each other.
Yes. Yeah. I'm trying to imagine the bickering. There's a movie called Moneyball. Anybody ever seen Moneyball? I don't remember if there's anything that's not exactly Christian reason why you shouldn't watch Moneyball. There probably is, but we actually had to watch Moneyball when we were doing military decision-making process training in the military. It was assigned watching. And I was glad we watched it. They were trying to figure out how to it was it's a Brad Pitt movie about baseball, and their team is losing, and it's supposed to be a rendition of a true story, and they're trying to figure out how to get good players on their team when they have a little bit of money. And then they reformulated the problem. It's like, we don't need good players, we need to win games, we need to get on base, we don't need rock star players, we need people who can get on base. So they reformulated the problem, and then they reassessed the process of how they select players. So instead of trying to get a bunch of money to get really high name players, they would use the money that they had to get people who could get on base. And then I think even that year that they did that, they didn't win the World Series or anything, but they ranked pretty high, way higher than anybody thought they would. And it revolutionized the way the game was played and how people did things. So I think that's important. When it comes to applications and stuff, I can imagine that, y'all know what a TOE is, a TOE, theory of everything. There's several people who are trying to do theories of everything. I think there is one day in the future going to be a connection of metaphysical truth, I guess is what I would call like Christianity. There's going to be a connection of spirituality, religion, science, history, and engineering. There's going to be a connection of all these things where there is some kind of coalescence, and I don't have the words for it, but I do think that little things like this are going to play in. And it could be something like, if somebody wants to go get hired at a job, if they find out that they've been doing FSI stuff, they would much more want them to be on their team because they could bring that methodology into a tire building factory or whatever it is they're doing. The methodology itself and the willingness to update the methodology and the way the ideas are shared, and we try to keep, you know, humility and high and hubris low as much as we possibly, that kind of stuff. If we can model it here, I think it will bleed out and become like this strange attractor where other people see the value of it, and then they want to do it too. Kind of like the iPhone. You can't, or any kind of smartphone, you couldn't issue a mandate telling everybody to go buy one, but when people see the value of it, everyone goes and does it anyway. And I think the value of what we're doing here, it's small now, but it will grow. And so instead of having one preacher who's preaching to a bunch of people, in this room right here, we have 6 people who can well articulate things that are valuable and insightful that can help other people transform and grow. And that other churches, and maybe some do, but typically that's not what gets produced from church. You get a bunch of ideologically possessed people who know a bunch of propositions, and then that's it. And then eventually they fall out of it or whatever. And I don't think that's going to happen with a group like this. Anyway, I think something's going to emerge. I don't know what it is yet. Scott.
So just listening to what you said, how does that look in Christianity in general? Like, how would that person behave? How would they speak?
First part of me wants to say that if it was done well, they wouldn't want us to be part of it. Like, what the end result, the final product of whatever it is we're trying to do here, whatever that looks like in 25 years, they wouldn't let us join the group. But, and I want to, like, Josh, just a second, because I want to hear what you have to say, but I got to get this thought out before it leaves my brain. If you could imagine it's during the millennial reign, Christ is on the throne, and the way the world is ran is by people who actually can manifest procedurally, propositionally, participatorily the mind of Christ in everything that they do. So everything from business transactions to the way trains are built and engineered and run, and semi-trucks and self-driving cars or teleportation, whatever is happening is all an outgrowth of this mind of Christ coalescence that permeates into every domain of existence. And then your interaction with other people would be something like the cells in your body interacting with each other, where everybody exchanges and gets what they need in order to succeed, and nobody's selfish or stealing or introducing harm into the commons or things like that. And so something like that, I think, is possible to be created, like in the high aim thing. What were you going to say, Josh?
I was going to say, I think it would have to start with some kind of moving a direction away from the statements of faith that people hold to in their denominations. There would have to be some kind of barrier that breaks down so that you could actually talk about the Bible with somebody and be able to learn with them and from them, because we don't have that. We just don't have that in the church.
So yeah, I think you're onto something there, Josh. Like, to move past the statements of faith. So I think there's like a set of phases of things that need to be done. And I don't think that we can perceive, like perspective, I don't think that we can see very far beyond what it is that's ours to do right now. So if it's our job to cross that threshold into a space where we no longer have statements of faith, but maybe statements of procedure or something, as long as they won't come methodologically possessed by those statements. But if we have statements that are developed to be up, that kind of thing, I think you know what I'm saying, that are not stale, they're not propositional, maybe that's the first step. Maybe that's what we do in our generation. And then something moves on better from there.
Isn't what you're describing the essence of walking by the Spirit? whatever that
Yeah.
is.
Yeah. 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 It's presuming that we're going in the right direction and doing the right thing and be or correctly oriented and aiming for the right thing. Yes. That would be it.
This is the idea that I'm still formulating of the sense bender. It's the person who's I'm not going to put an adjective or a verb to it, but it's the person. It's hard. They're able to bend your senses like that. They can make these appeals either by proposition or by you watching them do something procedurally, or has this psychotechnology to be able to get you to like shock load you out of a certain perspective and just break a frame. It's a sense bender.
To go into the meta, break the paradigm.
It's almost like
being a martyr when you're willing to die for what you believe, and it would change how people thought if they saw somebody do it.
Yeah, it had a lasting impact on that. Yeah.
I remember.
So let's go ahead, Scott.
I remembered a story about this guy was riding on a train with his children, and the children were just running amok and making a real nuisance of themselves. And the passengers were looking over there and said, "What's the matter with that guy not controlling his children?" And finally, somebody had had enough, and they walked over there and talked to the guy, and he said he was just kind of in a trance, and the person that went to talk to him kind of broke the trance and said, "What's the matter with you, man? Can't you keep your children under control? They're being a nuisance to the other passengers." And he said, "Well, my wife just died." And when the passengers understood this, they all went in, helped entertain the children and everything. And just that one bit of understanding changed the whole framework of the discussion.
That's such a good example. Such a good example.
Yeah, he just touched on something I was thinking, that when you develop a deeper level of understanding, it changes the way that you engage with people. And it makes me think of when Jesus was on the cross, he says, "Forgive them, Father, for they know not what they do." And then the same thing with Stephen when he was getting stoned, he said something similar. It's like, I'm starting to slowly realize that people who don't believe, or even if they are a believer, but maybe they're ideologically or methodologically possessed, they don't understand. And once you understand that they don't understand, I feel like
it's like they're in a battle they don't know they're in.
Yeah. And once you understand that and you can see that, it shifts your perspective of how you view that person and how you engage with them.
Yeah,
like how you show up with them. Yeah.
Wow. So one of the ways that I think that you can actually perform the sense bender is by, again, trying to really get a real grip on the words you're using. So it's like, if you want to shock somebody out of their propositional possession or something like that, you're saying like, well, I understand what they're going through or what's going on. So to understand is to be under a standing. So now in order to shock them out of this, you're going to need a particular level of understanding of where they're going wrong procedurally and stand on that ground. And then further down, there's, okay, so this person has a methodological possession. I need to understand what it's like at their perspective, or from a third person perspective, or whatever, and understand what is going on here. And then it gets all the way down to, okay, I'm dealing with somebody here who is having existential issues, and I understand this. So I need to, there's a meaning, something going wrong with how they're perceiving meaning or experiencing meaning at the participatory level. So being able to discern those things and truly understand by placing yourself and accessing whatever amount of that knowledge space that you need to access, and manipulate it, or I don't know if manipulate is the right word, but
Well, yeah, like
bend it. Yeah.
So how would you see the world? Like what perspective? How would you see the world differently through your eyes if your wife had just died? You know,
That's what I think happened when Scott was telling us that
Yeah.
story. He was showing you how this guy, he was able to bend everybody's perspectival knowledge base, you know.
Yes. Yeah. Being jolted out of a set of presumptions. So there was like a little bespoke, there's like a little paradigm that formed based on everyone else's perspectival awareness that this guy doesn't know how to take care of his kids. And that's a proposition. It turns out not to be a proposition because there was something at the perspectival level that how he was seeing the world that they did not perceive. And so if you have empathy to that, because you're not a narcissist, because you can empathetically see somebody else's perspective, it changed. Yeah. It's amazing how it helps to break it down. Yeah, Josh.
Maybe we can do a real life test of this right now. So you guys are familiar with Ravi Zacharias?
Boy.
Well, I'm probably not going where you think I'm going. So he always talked about
bracing for impact.
I know, don't worry, it's not like that. So we talked about, he used to talk about origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. So I was thinking, is there a way of reverse engineering those three philosophical categories, or whatever you would want to call those, and try to find out where that kind of thought process comes from? Is that a propositional
So say that again. What were those?
Origin, meaning, morality, and destiny. So when he would have debates, an atheist would ask him a question, and he'd basically assign whatever their appeal was to a certain level or a certain category of those four. And so I'm trying to think, well, what comes first, the chicken or the egg? The four types of knowing, we're talking about four levels of knowing. Can we put those, can we reorganize them? Can we at least try to reverse engineer how somebody would come up, a theologian would come up with something like that to start applying without even having addressed the fact that there's four types of knowing? It's like,
yeah.
We talk about epistemology, and you're already, you've like jumped the gun, the cart's before the horse, in my opinion. Looking back now from trying to learn epistemology, I feel like I wish somebody would have talked to me about the four types of knowing before I even got to that point where I could talk about origin, meaning, morality, and destiny.
That's a really good point. So is there like an equivalent? Is there like an equivalent to that, like a quick little mnemonic that you can use to mentally organize and assess what level I need to approach this problem at?
I don't even know where I mean, that's just what came in my head. Like, I'm trying.
No, that's really good though.
Here's the process, because so I moved up to Prescott not maybe 8-9 months ago, and I go to a Baptist church, for example, and listen to the sermon. And at that time, all I wanted to do was find out if this was more of a popcorn sermon, or if this pastor actually was bringing information to me from a philosophical or epistemological level. So I would take those 4 categories: origin, meaning, morality, destiny. And when he would preach on a specific passage of scripture and then assign a real life scenario that he would apply that to, I would try to put that in a category and say, okay, well, this applies to origin, or this applies to meaning. And I could kind of expose where certain things were more out of place, if that makes sense.
Yeah. So if we could do this, if we could become, and I think this would need to be a skill set that would need to be built. Because I think I get the concept, but it's something you would need to practice assessing situations in the 4 kinds of knowing. And then distributed cognition, we would be able to help each other see what the other ones are missing.
Exactly. Yeah.
I really like that. No, I think that's very insightful, Josh. I'm writing that down. I'm going to be thinking about that too. Josh and Adrian keep speaking. I'm never going to get any sleep. Yeah, well, I mean, so many comments you guys are making just make me want to just sit and think. In the future, go ahead.
Can I just say something that I was fearful of all day, since or all night and all day? It's kind of like I felt like we were all like standing around a piñata and somebody busted open that piñata and there was all this candy all around, and I spent the entire day with the anxiety that I wasn't going to get as much candy as I could. And that's how I feel permanently right now, is that I'm going to miss out on all of this candy, and it's stressing me out because it's like I can't grab enough meaning from all the stuff that's going on. You know what I'm saying? And I feel like I'm going to miss out on something. So,
yeah. I do want to get together. I've talked with Josh and Nick a little bit about this. I do want to get together and have a little session on values. But anyway, I'm going to send out a product first, so you kind of know where I'm going with it. And I got some feedback from Josh I'm going to put with it. And then maybe use distributed cognition so we can come up with a set of like FSI values for how do we incorporate all 4 kinds of knowing when we're encountering something. And then what you just said, Josh, is probably going to be like a telos for that set of values. Like how can we walk away with a tool that's easy to use?
I love memes too. If you're doing a YouTube video, if you can throw some memes in there.
Throw some memes in there. I'm gonna make some memes of this group right here. Yeah, we got some comments over here on the side. It's been a little over an hour. I want to talk about these real quick. Last night, and Ruth put these back up here to remind us. We talked about the phrase "help meet," and poor James isn't here to defend himself. But the phrase "help meet" came up, and yeah, so we were talking about the role of men and women, and we were talking about the Bible's view, anything from atrocities to how the Bible treats women, and then some other comments led into men and women, how they deal with each other, what's the scriptural approach, and then somebody was talking about help meet, and then that is like fingernails on a chalkboard to me, because help, the word meet in the Bible where it says Eve was made a help meet for Adam, it's a help suitable. The word meet is not mate. It's equivalent to the word suitable, like, you know, like meet it out, like it's suitable. So a help suitable for Adam. Like God had Adam name all the animals, and Kent Hovind makes a joke about this, to where it's almost like the animals are being paraded in front of Adam so that he can name them, and so that he can pick out a suitable helpmate, and or a suitable help, you know, a person that's suitable to cohabit with, that kind of thing. And then he's going through the animals. He was like, hippopotamus, no thanks, you know, all kind of stuff. And eventually it comes down to the point where there isn't a help that's suitable for him. So then God creates one. And then the theologian Matthew Henry has this phrase where he says that woman was created from the side of man to be equal with him, or from his rib. It's created from the rib of man, from his side to be equal with him, not from his foot to be trampled on by him, not from his head to rule over him, but from his side to be equal with him, near his heart to be led by him, and under his arm to be protected by him. So we talked about that, and I'm relaying that for that point. And also we talked about, that didn't get recorded, atrocities in the Old Testament and what that means, and then what the Bible has to say about the treatment of women. And we talked a little bit about integral theory and what societies are capable of dealing with at different times, and whether or not, it's not like something is necessarily sanctioning what's happening, especially with today's values. But wow, there's so much that goes into this when we think about it, that because when women and men get together, there's a cost that's higher, it's disproportionate cost to the woman, because she's the one, women's bodies have kids and men's don't. And so there has to be some kind of social construct put in place in order to protect women from bearing the burden of that cost unduly. And so society creates rules to make men share the cost if you're going to be a man worth your salt. So that's why we have institutions like marriage and things like that. And that's why we protect the institution of, human intimacy in marriage, so that we don't have this frivolous thing that produces a high cost and then maybe unwanted human beings. And this leaves the woman with this high cost of having this to reproduce this human being, and the man's nowhere to be found now. And so that cost gets put on the man, and rightly so. But at the same time, because of that cost that's put on the man can be exploited and weaponized against him. And so both the man and the woman have to be very careful about who they let into their life. Now, if you don't, and then we talked about in other societies, like when they found Saddam Hussein, they basically paid prostitutes to go do pillow talk to the Ba'ath Party officials to find out where these guys are. Well, if you back up 5,000 years, and you see these high-placed men be brought down by women because they seduce. So men are much more highly susceptible to seduction, because nearly 99% of women have kids and only about 50% of men have kids. And so it's much more competitive for a man in order to mate and have a kid. And so he's going to be either adapted or designed or adapted, if, as an evolutionist might say, in order to it be higher on his salience landscape to notice an opportunity and to try to seize an opportunity to have a mating encounter. And so therefore he's more highly susceptible to seduction, and his dopaminergic reward systems are geared toward this kind of thing. And if that gets exploited and the man has any kind of power at all, you can bring down a whole kingdom. And so men in general might retaliate against that and develop all these plans and policies and start treating women like dirt, just so they can't get exploited by them, because they've seen how it happens. Now, good or bad, good or ugly, that kind of thing isn't the point, whether it's right or wrong. The point is that kind of stuff exists. And then when you try to start telling people how to behave in the midst of this, probably, I would imagine, it takes a little bit of time to grow out of it, and we also talked about how women are more, if you look at the big 5 personality traits in psychology: openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, women tend to be more agreeable, which is good for babies because they have the babies. And if you weren't more agreeable, you might not be such a good caretaker of a baby. The downside to that is that because they're more agreeable, they're less likely to negotiate for a higher wage when they go to get a job. The agreeableness thing is just about a 60-40 thing. They tend to be more agreeable than men. And that's why the jails are full of men, because they're more disagreeable, they're more belligerent. So there's a lot of things that are different about men and women that if you were to remove the divine ethic and remove divine guidance telling you what to do, just imagine like a bunch of societies, like a bunch of Walking Dead societies out there, just trying to figure this stuff out on their own, trying to just observe this kind of thing. And then all of a sudden you get this information with Moses about starting there in that kind of society. What do you do? And then of course in the New Testament, things are much more different, where there's a lot more, there's a lot fewer things you can point to that seem horrible by today's standards. But we did talk about those yesterday. And I guess I'll stop talking here because I've talked a lot. And if anybody has any comments on those things, because it's about 8:46 and I don't want to keep anybody too long. So we'll see what other comments we have, and then we'll lean toward wrapping this up. Did I say anything horrible? Does anybody have any comments? Anything to add onto any of that? Because those are like, that stuff would get me canceled.
Should we just make a couple comments before we go about, I think it was, what did Scott bring? Scott, was it Scott or Joe? Oh, no, it was Scott, about remission and forgiveness.
Oh, yeah.
I thought we dug up some good stuff with that.
Do you want to talk about that for a sec?
I could
Or
let Scott.
I could rehash what.
I could put Scott on the hook.
Yeah.
I'm satisfied. I don't need to go through it again.
Yeah, I kind of just want to capture a little bit because we didn't record last night. We talked about remission and forgiveness, and we looked at the difference between individual forgiveness versus Israel getting their sins remitted when the return of Christ comes. So national versus individual might be a little bit of a different thing. We looked at Romans 3:25 and Hebrews 9:15, where Jesus is for the remission of sins that are under the first testament. It doesn't mean the sins that are passed for each individual when they get saved, but the remission of sins that are under the first covenant. And then we also talked about, like right now, we have forgiveness and remission and redemption all at the same time because Christ's blood is already available to us. Whereas before, these things were covered up by animal sacrifices and whatnot, but only the blood of Christ could take them away. Well, we're in a situation where they're taken away. And then we talked about forgiveness, breaking the word down and what it would mean, like the agapic principle of giving somebody love. It's not just excusing an infraction when somebody makes it and says they're sorry, but giving somebody love in advance to help them develop as a person as they grow, despite them being a liability to you, or it not really being warranted by anything that they've earned. It's graceful giving of agape, like you do it with your children. You give them whatever they need to grow into adults, even though they may not appreciate it very much. And if we do that with each other, like we Christians do that with each other, we meet each other in grace and love, and we give in advance agape to each other to help each other develop and grow together. That's like forgiveness becomes a way of living, not an incidental thing when somebody does something bad to you. So we talked about that a little bit, which we might be able to talk to more when we have more time. I know Josh has got to go here. I guess we can go ahead and wrap this up unless anybody has any burning comments. I really appreciate, I know it's my fault I didn't record last night. I really appreciate all you coming back. I can't say thanks enough. And this has been hugely beneficial to me tonight. And I really appreciate you guys coming on short notice like this. Any burning comments before we go for the evening? You guys are awesome. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
I'll see you Wednesday.
Night, guys.